The crucifixion of Jesus is one of the most significant events in history, revered by millions of people around the world. But have you ever wondered what happened behind the scenes of this momentous event? Imagine if we could hear directly from Pontius Pilate, the man who authorized Jesus' execution. What if he had left a letter revealing his reflections and regrets about that fateful day? In this video, we will explore the alleged letter written by Pilate, a document that brings to light his doubts, pressures, and feelings after the crucifixion. Did he truly believe in Jesus' innocence? What were the real motivations behind his actions? And how did he cope with the consequences of his decisions? Get ready for a journey through time that will uncover hidden secrets and offer a new perspective on one of the most crucial moments in human history. Stay with us until the end and discover the shocking and emotional details of this historic letter. In the time of Jesus, the region of Judea was under the control of the vast and powerful Roman Empire. The Roman Empire at that time was a formidable force, spanning 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. This vast territorial expanse was governed with an iron fist, and Judea was no exception. To maintain order in a frequently tumultuous region, the Romans appointed governors with both military and administrative authority. Pontius Pilate was appointed procurator of Judea around the year 26 AD. His appointment was not merely due to his administrative skills, but also his influential family connections. Pilate was married to Claudia Procula, the granddaughter of Emperor Augustus, an alliance that undoubtedly bolstered his political standing. Judea, a small and troublesome province, was a challenging territory for any governor. The Jewish population, with its religious fervor and resistance to foreign rule, was difficult to control. Pilate quickly became known for his harshness and cruelty. He governed with a ruthless style, often resorting to violence to suppress any form of dissent. Philosophers and historians of the time, such as Philo of Alexandria and Flavius Josephus, described Pilate as an inflexible and brutal man, prone to insulting and humiliating the Jews. In one notorious episode, Pilate provoked the anger of the Jews by placing banners bearing the image of the Roman emperor in Jerusalem, violating Jewish religious precepts that prohibited images. The reaction was immediate and fierce. The Jews revolted, demanding the removal of the banners. Pilate initially refused, but faced with the obstinate resistance of the Jews, he eventually relented and removed the banners. Another incident that highlighted Pilate's insensitivity was his use of funds from the temple treasury to build an aqueduct to bring water to Jerusalem. The Jews were outraged by the sacrilegious use of their sacred money. When they protested, Pilate ordered his soldiers to infiltrate the crowd of demonstrators in disguise and, at a signal, attack violently, resulting in a massacre. These events illustrate Pilate's despotic nature and his disregard for the religious sensibilities of the Jews. However, Judea was not only a problematic province because of its rebellious population, it was also a hotbed of religious fervor and messianic expectations. The Jews eagerly awaited the arrival of a Messiah, a promised leader who would free Israel from foreign rule and restore God's kingdom on earth. This atmosphere of messianic hope often led to revolts and unrest, something that Roman governors like Pilate had to frequently contend with. Jesus of Nazareth emerged in this context as a charismatic and influential figure. His teachings, miracles, and growing popularity sparked both the enthusiasm of the masses and the concern of the Jewish religious authorities. The leaders of the Sanhedrin, the supreme religious council of the Jews, saw Jesus as a threat to the status quo. He openly challenged their interpretations of the law and criticized religious hypocrisy, undermining their authority. When Jesus was finally betrayed by Judas Iscariot and arrested, he was brought before the Sanhedrin to be judged. The charges against him were blasphemy for claiming to be the Son of God and for declaring himself king, which implied a threat to Roman rule. However, the Sanhedrin did not have the authority to carry out a death sentence. Only the Roman governor could authorize such a penalty. Thus, Jesus was taken to Pilate. For Pilate, Jesus' situation was a political trap. He knew that condemning Jesus to death could incite a revolt among Jesus' followers, but freeing him could anger the Jewish religious leaders and cause instability. Pilate, who had no interest in the theological disputes of the Jews, was primarily concerned with maintaining order and control. During Jesus' trial, Pilate tried several times to avoid responsibility. He sent Jesus to Herod Antipas, the Tetrarch of Galilee, hoping Herod would resolve the issue. However, Herod sent Jesus back to Pilate without rendering a verdict. Pilate then attempted to appease the crowd by offering to release a prisoner, a Passover tradition. The crowd, stirred up by the religious leaders, chose to free Barabbas, a criminal, instead of Jesus. Facing increasing pressure, Pilate resorted to a symbolic gesture. He washed his hands before the crowd, declaring himself innocent of Jesus' blood. This act, recorded in the Gospels, symbolizes his attempt to distance himself from moral responsibility for the crucifixion. However, he still gave in to the pressure and ordered Jesus to be crucified. Crucifixion was a method of execution reserved for the worst criminals and rebels. It was designed to be a slow, painful, and humiliating death, meant to serve as a public deterrent. Jesus was flogged, a brutal form of torture that often preceded crucifixion, and forced to carry his cross to Golgotha. There, he was nailed to the cross between two thieves, symbolizing his association with sinners. During the crucifixion, extraordinary events were reported. Darkness covered the land from noon until 3 in the afternoon, and the temple veil was torn from top to bottom. There was also an earthquake, and some tombs opened, resurrecting saints who had died. These supernatural events had a profound impact on many of those present, including a Roman centurion who declared, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." Pilate, in ordering the crucifixion, thought he was solving an immediate political problem. However, Jesus' execution had profound and lasting consequences. The letter Pilate wrote after the crucifixion reveals his reflections and possible regrets. He mentions the pressures he faced from the Jewish leaders and the crowd, and describes the extraordinary events that occurred during the crucifixion, such as the darkness and the earthquake. Pilate also reflects on the nature of Jesus, acknowledging him as a just and innocent man. Pilate's story is a powerful reminder of the moral dilemmas and political pressures that leaders face. It is a story of how power can corrupt, and how decisions made under pressure can have profound and lasting consequences. Pilate, despite his flaws, is a figure who challenges us to reflect on our own decisions and the pursuit of truth and justice. The historical context of Jesus' crucifixion is complex and multifaceted. It involves issues of power, politics, religion, and morality. The figure of Pontius Pilate, with his actions and reflections, offers a window into better understanding the events that changed history and continue to resonate today. On the night Jesus was betrayed, tension in Jerusalem was palpable. Knowing what was to come, Jesus gathered his disciples for the Last Supper, a moment filled with symbolism and emotion. During the supper, he instituted what Christians today know as the Eucharist, breaking the bread and sharing the wine, symbols of his body and blood, in a gesture of profound communion and imminent sacrifice. After the supper, Jesus and his disciples went to the Garden of Gethsemane, a quiet olive grove on the outskirts of Jerusalem. There, among the silent trees, Jesus prayed intensely, feeling the weight of what was to come. His words reflect deep anguish but also total submission to God's will. "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." His disciples, exhausted and confused, fell asleep while Jesus prayed. It was in this moment of vulnerability that Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, betrayed Jesus. Judas knew the place well, aware that Jesus often retreated there to pray. He led a group of soldiers and guards sent by the Jewish religious leaders to arrest Jesus. The signal to identify Jesus in the darkness was a kiss, a gesture of friendship that became a symbol of eternal betrayal. By kissing Jesus, Judas fulfilled his role in the tragic narrative. The guards moved in and arrested Jesus, but Peter, one of the most fervent disciples, tried to resist, drawing his sword and cutting off the ear of Malchus, a servant of the high priest. Jesus, however, rebuked Peter, healing Malchus's ear and saying, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword." He surrendered peacefully, showing his willingness to accept the fate that awaited him. Jesus was first taken to the house of Annas, the former high priest, and then to Caiaphas, the acting high priest. There, before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, Jesus faced a hasty trial filled with irregularities. Witnesses were summoned to present false and contradictory accusations. The Sanhedrin, composed of elders, scribes, and chief priests, desperately sought a reason to condemn Jesus. The central charge against Jesus was blasphemy for claiming to be the Son of God. When directly questioned by Caiaphas if he was the Christ, the Son of the Blessed, Jesus affirmed, sealing his fate. His response provoked a furious reaction. Caiaphas tore his garments in indignation and declared Jesus guilty of blasphemy, a crime punishable by death according to Jewish law. However, the Sanhedrin did not have the authority to carry out a death sentence. Only the Romans, who ruled the region, could authorize such a punishment. Therefore, the religious leaders took Jesus to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, the next morning. They needed to convince Pilate that Jesus was not just a religious problem but a political threat. To do this, they accused Jesus of claiming to be the King of the Jews, a direct affront to the Roman emperor. When Pilate received Jesus, he quickly realized that the accusations were motivated by envy and rivalry. He interrogated Jesus, asking if he was the King of the Jews. Jesus responded enigmatically, "You say so." Intrigued, Pilate found in Jesus a calm and dignified man who did not seem to pose a real threat to Roman power. Pilate knew Jesus was innocent of the charges against him, but he found himself caught in a web of political pressures to avoid responsibility. Pilate sent Jesus to Herod Antipas, the tetrarch of Galilee, who was also in Jerusalem for Passover. Herod, hoping to see Jesus perform a miracle, was disappointed by Jesus' silence and, after mocking him, sent him back to Pilate. Pilate then tried to appeal to the crowd's compassion by offering to release a prisoner, as was customary during Passover. He presented Jesus and Barabbas, a notorious criminal, hoping the crowd would choose Jesus. However, the religious leaders incited the crowd to demand Barabbas' release and Jesus' crucifixion. Desperate to avoid a revolt and maintain order, Pilate gave in to the pressure. He had Jesus brutally scourged, hoping this would satisfy the crowd's bloodlust. The Roman soldiers mocked Jesus, placing a crown of thorns on his head and a purple robe on his shoulders, ridiculing his claim to kingship. Pilate then presented Jesus to the crowd, saying, "Here is the man." But the sight of Jesus, bloody and humiliated, did not arouse compassion. Instead, the crowd shouted even louder for his crucifixion. In a final gesture of impotence, Pilate washed his hands before the people, declaring himself innocent of Jesus' blood. However, he knew he could not escape the moral responsibility for his decision. Pilate ordered Jesus to be crucified, handing him over to the soldiers to be taken to Golgotha. The arrest of Jesus marked the beginning of a series of events that would culminate in the crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension, profoundly impacting the course of human history. The moments of betrayal, fear, power, and compassion intertwine to create a powerful narrative that continues to resonate and inspire millions around the world. The trial of Jesus before Pontius Pilate is one of the most dramatic and intense episodes of the New Testament, loaded with political tensions, moral dilemmas, and treacherous manipulations. Arrested the previous night, Jesus was brought before the Jewish religious leaders, who quickly realized that the only way to ensure his death was to convince the Roman authorities that he posed a threat to the empire. Thus, Jesus was brought before Pilate the next morning. Pilate, the Roman governor, was used to dealing with public order issues and rebellions in Judea. However, when confronted with Jesus, he found a prisoner unlike any other. Jesus' calm and dignity starkly contrasted with the fervent and hate-filled accusations from the religious leaders. Pilate quickly perceived that the motivation behind Jesus' arrest was envy and rivalry, not justice. During the interrogation, Pilate asked Jesus if he was the king of the Jews, a charge that implied treason against Rome. Jesus answered enigmatically, "You say so." Intrigued, Pilate continued his questioning, but Jesus largely remained silent, responding only when necessary. This silence, combined with Jesus' serene demeanor, left Pilate even more puzzled about the true nature of the accusations. Pilate attempted various strategies to avoid condemning Jesus. First, he suggested to the Jewish leaders that they judge Jesus according to their own religious laws, but they insisted that under Roman law, Jesus had to be sentenced to death. Seeing the situation becoming more complicated, Pilate sent Jesus to Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, who was also in Jerusalem for Passover. Herod hoped to see some miracle performed by Jesus, but when Jesus remained silent, Herod sent him back to Pilate without issuing a verdict. Back with Pilate, the Roman governor still sought a way to avoid the crucifixion of a man he clearly considered innocent. He decided to appeal to the tradition of releasing a prisoner during Passover, offering the people a choice between Jesus and Barabbas, a notorious criminal. Pilate was convinced that the people would choose to release Jesus, but to his surprise and horror, the crowd, incited by the religious leaders, demanded the release of Barabbas and the crucifixion of Jesus. Desperate, Pilate tried one last measure to save Jesus. He ordered Jesus to be brutally flogged, hoping that this severe punishment would be enough to satisfy the crowd's bloodlust. The Roman soldiers mocked Jesus, placing a crown of thorns on his head and a purple robe on his shoulders, and then presented him to the crowd. Pilate, displaying Jesus, said, "Here is the man," hoping that the sight of Jesus, bloodied and humiliated, would arouse compassion. However, the cries of "Crucify him" only grew louder. Feeling the growing pressure and fearing a revolt, Pilate gave in to the will of the crowd. In a symbolic gesture, he washed his hands before the people, declaring himself innocent of Jesus' blood. However, this act did not absolve him of moral responsibility for the decision. Pilate knew he was condemning an innocent man but chose to sacrifice justice to maintain order and avoid conflict. The trial of Jesus before Pilate is a powerful example of how political and social pressures can influence judicial decisions. Although Pilate recognized Jesus' innocence, he succumbed to the pressure from the religious leaders and the crowd. His attempt to distance himself from responsibility by washing his hands does not erase the fact that he was ultimately responsible for Jesus' crucifixion. This trial was not just a historical event, but a moment that resonates deeply within the Christian narrative, symbolizing injustice and sacrifice. Jesus, condemned unjustly, accepted his fate with serenity, fulfilling the divine purpose that would transcend that specific moment, affecting humanity for millennia. The complexity of this trial, with its betrayals, dilemmas, and manipulations, continues to be studied and reflected upon by scholars and believers worldwide. It is a reminder of the fragility of human justice and the importance of standing firm in moral convictions, even under immense pressure. The crucifixion of Jesus is one of the most painful and significant moments in Christian history, marking the climax of a series of events filled with betrayal, trial, and suffering. After being condemned by Pontius Pilate, Jesus was handed over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified, a brutal and humiliating method of execution reserved for the worst criminals and rebels. Already weakened by severe scourging, Jesus was forced to carry his own cross through the streets of Jerusalem to the execution site known as Golgotha, or Place of the Skull. The weight of the cross and the blood loss from the scourging caused Jesus to stumble and fall repeatedly along the way. At one point, the Roman soldiers compelled Simon of Cyrene, a bystander coming in from the fields, to carry Jesus' cross. This act of forced compassion allowed Jesus to reserve his strength for the final moments of his life. Upon reaching Golgotha, Jesus was stripped of his garments and nailed to the cross. Nails were driven into his wrists and feet, causing excruciating pain. The cross was then raised, leaving Jesus hanging between heaven and earth, a horrific sight of suffering and agony. Beside him, two criminals were also crucified, one on his right and the other on his left. The inscription INRI was placed above his head, signifying Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, in Latin, Hebrew, and Greek, a gesture of mockery by the Roman soldiers. Jesus agonized on the cross. The crowd that gathered to witness the execution showed no mercy. Many mocked him, saying, "If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." The religious leaders, who had pressured Pilate to condemn Jesus, also took the opportunity to ridicule him, challenging Jesus to save himself if he truly was the Messiah. The scene was a spectacle of cruelty and contempt, reflecting the depth of the injustice Jesus was suffering. Despite the pain and humiliation, Jesus maintained his composure and demonstrated incredible mercy. In one of the most touching moments, he looked at his executioners and said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." These words echoed in the minds of many present, revealing the essence of Jesus' teaching on love and forgiveness. Even in the face of death, the crucifixion of Jesus was marked by supernatural events that left everyone present in awe. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, an unusual darkness covered the land. This darkness was a sign that something extraordinary was happening. During this moment of darkness, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This expression of anguish reflected the depth of his suffering and the feeling of separation from God as he bore the sins of the world. Shortly before his death, Jesus uttered his final words, "It is finished." With this, he declared the completion of his mission on earth, the fulfillment of all prophecies, and the accomplishment of the divine plan of redemption. Then, surrendering his spirit to God, Jesus died. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, symbolizing the opening of a new way for humanity to approach God. An earthquake shook the land, and many tombs opened, resurrecting saints who had died. These supernatural signs left many, including the Roman centurion overseeing the execution, convinced that Jesus truly was the Son of God. The death of Jesus on the cross was an event that forever changed the course of human history. His sacrifice symbolized the victory over sin and death, offering hope and redemption to all who believe in him. The crucifixion is remembered as the ultimate act of love and obedience, where Jesus, the innocent, took upon himself the punishment that humanity deserved. After his death, Jesus' body was taken down from the cross by Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin who had become a follower of Jesus. With Pilate's permission, Joseph wrapped Jesus' body in fine linen and placed it in a new tomb hewn out of rock. The entrance to the tomb was sealed with a large stone, and soldiers were assigned to guard it, ensuring the body remained secure. The crucifixion of Jesus is one of the most profoundly significant and emotional events in the Christian faith. It is a story of suffering, sacrifice, and unconditional love, continuing to inspire and transform lives through the centuries. Through his death, Jesus offered humanity a path to reconciliation with God and the hope of eternal life, marking the beginning of a new era of grace and redemption. The crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth left an indelible mark on history, not only for its religious significance but also for its profound political and social impacts. One of the lesser-known yet equally intriguing aspects of this event is the purported letter written by Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who presided over Jesus' trial. If authentic, this letter provides a rare and deeply human insight into Pilate's thoughts and feelings following the crucifixion. Pilate's letter has been the subject of much speculation and debate over the centuries. Allegedly written to his superior, Emperor Tiberius, it aims to explain the events leading to Jesus' crucifixion. Pilate, often described as cruel and ruthless, reveals a more complex and conflicted side of his personality in this document. Through his words, we glimpse a man haunted by his decisions and the consequences of his actions. To the beginning of the letter, Pilate describes the atmosphere in Jerusalem during Passover, a time of great agitation and religious fervor. He mentions Jesus, a man attracting crowds with his teachings and miracles. Pilate acknowledges that Jesus was different from any other leader or rebel he had encountered. He talks about Jesus' calm and dignity, even in the face of furious accusations from the Jewish religious leaders. Pilate realized that the charges against Jesus were driven more by envy and fear of losing power than by any real crime. Pilate describes Jesus' trial as a deeply disturbing experience. He mentions how impressed he was with Jesus' serenity, even when confronted with the prospect of a horrible death. Pilate tried multiple times to avoid responsibility for the execution, first by sending Jesus to Herod Antipas, and then by offering to release a prisoner, a Passover tradition. However, the crowds, incited by the religious leaders, demanded the release of Barabbas and the crucifixion of Jesus. Pilate confesses in the letter his desperation and frustration as his efforts to save Jesus were repeatedly thwarted. One of the most revealing parts of the letter is when Pilate describes the moment he washed his hands before the crowd. He explains that this gesture was not only a symbolic act of renouncing responsibility, but also a desperate attempt to preserve his own conscience. Pilate admits that, although he publicly declared his innocence, he knew he could not escape the moral weight of his actions. The crucifixion of a man he believed to be innocent was something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Pilate also speaks about the supernatural events that accompanied Jesus' death. He mentions the darkness that covered the land, the earthquake, and the tearing of the temple veil. These signs, witnessed by many, reinforced Pilate's sense that Jesus was not an ordinary man. He describes how these occurrences left the population frightened and confused, leading many to question the justice of the execution. Pilate confesses that these events increased his unease and sense of guilt. Another important aspect of the letter is Pilate's reflection on the nature of Jesus. He recognizes that, unlike other prisoners he had dealt with, Jesus showed no fear or anger. Instead, he displayed a calm acceptance of his fate and surprising compassion, even for those condemning him. Pilate mentions Jesus' words on the cross, asking for forgiveness for his executioners, and how this deeply impacted everyone present, including the Roman soldiers. Pilate also addresses the political consequences of his decision. He knew that condemning Jesus could prevent an immediate revolt, but he also recognized that it would not solve the underlying issues in Judea. He mentions his fear that Jesus' execution might turn the prophet into a martyr and further strengthen the movement he represented. Pilate was aware that his attempt to maintain peace could have the opposite effect in the long term. To the end of the letter, Pilate expresses deep regret. He admits that, as governor, his priority was to maintain order and loyalty to the emperor, but this led him to compromise his moral integrity. Pilate acknowledges that by yielding to political and religious pressures, he participated in a terrible injustice. He concludes the letter by reflecting on the nature of power and justice, questioning whether he could ever find redemption for his actions. Although the authenticity of Pilate's letter is contested and many scholars consider it an apocryphal work, the document offers a powerful and moving narrative about the events surrounding Jesus' crucifixion. It humanizes Pilate, showing him not just as a historical villain, but as a man struggling with moral dilemmas and external pressures. The letter highlights the complexities of leadership and the challenges of making just decisions amid a whirlwind of political and social influences. True or not, Pilate's letter remains a fascinating piece of the historical and theological mosaic of Jesus' crucifixion. It reminds us that the events that shaped history are not just impersonal timelines, but are composed of individuals with their own struggles, fears, and regrets. The figure of Pilate, with all his flaws and contradictions, serves as a mirror to the dilemmas we all face in our lives, underscoring the importance of acting with justice and integrity, even when it goes against the prevailing current. The events surrounding the crucifixion of Jesus offer profound lessons that resonate to this day. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, emerges as a complex character grappling with moral dilemmas and political pressures. His attempt to evade responsibility by washing his hands reveals a man torn between maintaining order and dealing with a guilty conscience. The crucifixion of Jesus represents a moment of spiritual transformation in human history. His suffering and death on the cross symbolize the ultimate sacrifice and the redemption of sins. Jesus faced his death with dignity, forgiveness, and love, inspiring millions of people throughout the centuries. His final words, asking for forgiveness for his executioners, are an eternal call to unconditional love and mercy. The supernatural events that accompanied the crucifixion, the darkness, the earthquake, and the tearing of the temple veil, under the cosmic impact of this sacrifice. Pilate's letter, with its reflections and confessions, humanizes him, showing him as a man struggling with moral dilemmas. His attempt to justify his actions and express regret highlights the complexity of making just decisions under pressure. These events invite us to reflect on the importance of acting with integrity and justice. The story of Pilate and Jesus challenges us to question our own actions and motivations, striving to do what is right regardless of the consequences. The crucifixion of Jesus continues to resonate as a symbol of sacrifice, redemption, and hope, reminding us that true power lies in the ability to love, forgive, and act justly. It is an eternal lesson that continues to inspire and guide humanity. If you enjoyed this video and found the story of Pontius Pilate and the crucifixion of Jesus inspiring, please like and subscribe to our channel. This helps us continue bringing more content that touches the heart and inspires the soul. Now, we have a special invitation for you. If you have not yet accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, there is no better time than now. Jesus sacrificed his life to give us redemption and the hope of eternal life. Accepting Jesus is embracing God's deep love and the wonderful plans he has for your life. Share your testimony in the comments and tell us how God's love has transformed your life. We want to hear your stories of faith and hope. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. We are a community united by God's love. May the profound love of Jesus and God's plans for you unfold in extraordinary ways. May you feel the peace and joy that come from a life lived in fullness with Christ. God bless you and your family. See you in the next video.